Okay. My name is Oskar Knoblauch. That's Oskarknoblauch. I was born in Leipzig, Germany. That's Leipzig, Germany. I was born to a wonderful pair of parents. My father's name was Leopold, and my mom's name was Róża. Róża stands for rose in Polish. And I had an older brother and a sister. My brother's name was Siegmund, and my sister's name was Ilse. She was the oldest one by about 5 years, and we lived on the Biedermannstraße number 5. We lived in a very ordinary neighborhood, on a flat about 3 flats high in an apartment. Our neighbors were all Germans. They were mostly Protestants. We were the only Jews anywhere on the streets, except the Grossman's bakery. We went to school on Herderstraße. In my class, there was only 2 Jews. In my sister's class, there was none. She was the only one. And my brother was the same way, just one. We attended the school there every day, and we had, in the beginning, no problems at all. Everybody liked us. The neighborhood kids played with us. We played in their homes.
No anti-Semitism?
There was none, not really. You couldn't tell. Nobody paid any attention to us. In fact, my father and my uncle, who, by the way, was Adolf Färber, and he lived with us in this apartment. Both my father and my uncle were serving in the army during World War I. My father entered the army as a regular soldier, and when the war ended, he actually was decorated and came home as a lieutenant. My uncle joined the Polish Legion, and he too was an excellent soldier because he came home as a major. Now, here's an interesting little byline. When the war was finished, World War I, that is, his buddies, who all were big officers, joined the new organized Polish government. And they told him, they wrote to him into Leipzig, that he should come back to Poland, that if he were to go ahead and become a Christian, then he would be made a general in the Polish army. He declined. But to go back to my childhood, it was a great childhood. Nobody paid any attention.
You had an extended family there, right?
We in Leipzig itself, in Leipzig itself, we had, yes, I had an uncle. His name also was the Knoblauch family, and he had 3 sons. They somehow emigrated to Britain in 1932. So they escaped the noose of the henchmen. They were smart. They got away. For some reason or another, I don't know why we didn't, because I think my mother had her sister and her family in Poland. And they felt, well, we don't want to leave the continent, and we're going to stay. Nobody expected that Hitler would take over the way he did. Again, our neighbors, everybody liked us. The neighbor's family had a daughter.
Jewish, I take it.
We were the only Jews.
Yeah.
And the rest of them, the neighbors weren't Protestant. The girl next door, Renata, was my sister's best girlfriend, and they went to school to the same class. And they had a little boy who was a year older, Günther, and we had no problems. My father and Mr. Dorfman, Renata's father, used to go on Saturday nights and go to the Bierstube and talk about World War I. They were pals. But just like a cancer, when somebody catches the disease, it starts spreading. And pretty soon, it started, when I was 5 years old, my my parents enrolled me in the sports club, my brother and myself. And so we went to the sports club several times during the week with Gunther, and everybody liked us. The coaches, they had no problems with us.
And they knew you were Jewish.
They knew.
And you spoke fluent German.
Of course, you're born there. You're going to school.
And at home, did you speak German?
Nothing but German. I didn't know any other language.
You did.
There was no Yiddish. There was no Polish. Nothing.
So your family was not a real religious family.
Not really. We went to the major holidays because we had to walk across town to get to the synagogue.
Okay.
You know, you couldn't take the streetcar. Cars in the 20s or even 30s, it wasn't like it is here today. People didn't own cars. You had a bicycle. Cars, you had to be extremely rich. But the majority of the people, bicycles. Just like it used to be in China. You know, everybody was on a bicycle.
And the roads were not necessarily all paved either.
No, a correction here. The roads, as a matter of fact, were extremely good paved.
For bicycle riding.
Oh, for any riding. Every road was paved. Every road.
Huh.
And they were cleaned. Every day during the night, they would run the cleaners through those streets. There were clean streets. And Leipzig was an extremely big city. I think when I was living there, when I was born, what do you consider big? 900,000, 950,000 people? It was a good sizable city. But when Hitler started to get popular, and one day when my brother and I and Gunther came to the sports club, we were greeted by our coach who was in an SR uniform. And he held his hand out and he said, "You dirty Jews can't come in here anymore."
So he
Suddenly,
was a nice guy and he turned into a not so nice guy.
Right. Suddenly we were dirty Jews. We were just as clean as we were the day before.
Yeah.
But Gunther went inside, we stayed, and we went back home.
Did this happen in school also?
Within a few days, the first thing they did, you're going to sit in the back of the room now, and you will be excluded from any kind of activities. So even if I wanted to, if I wasn't a dummy, and as I raised my hand to answer questions, he never would ask me. But that was only days before I finally decided, and my parents decided, that we will not go to school anymore. And rightfully so, because within only a couple more weeks, the order came out, and no Jewish children were allowed to go to school. At the same time, they were demonstrating against Jewish stores.
What year would this been? 39?
That started in 33. I started, that was in 33. Now, the Grossman Bakery was on our street, just across the street almost. And, before Hitler came, everybody was coming. They couldn't wait to get all the goodies, because they had some good baking stuff there. They were producing some cakes and Kaiser rolls and breads and everything, pretzels. And then once of a sudden, they're being boycotted. They had white paint with a Star of David painted on, and Judah, meaning Jew. And nobody was allowed to go in the store. So eventually, within days, they had to close down. And I don't know what happened to them. They just disappeared. They just left. I don't know what happened to the Grossmans at all. Just one day, there was nobody there.
Would they lock up the bakery? Or what?
Well, they would lock up the bakery, but the Germans would come later on. They just ravished the whole store. They stole anything they could, because the Germans, the authorities didn't do nothing to that. It was a free-for-all. It became an open season to bother the Jews. Horrible things were being done. My father, was many times he came home on his bicycle, and he was thrown off while he was riding it.
What was his occupation?
My father's occupation was it was one of a kind. It's in the earlier years in the 1900s up to, maybe in the mid-1900s, fur was very important in Europe. The winters are cold and fur is being worn, whether it was an undergarment under your coat as an insulator, or whether it was collars, which you wore on coats. The women wore long coats as well. And just like anything else, fur loses its sheen and color in time. And my father, with the help of my uncle, who was a chemist by profession, Uncle Adolf, they developed a way of mixing some chemicals and restoring all those fur. So there was hardly anyone who was doing this, so he was quite busy. And the only problem was that a shop like this, where you had to work with those chemicals, which had to be boiled, it was kind of crude, had to be done on the outside of the city. And so he had a long ways to travel. And on the way home, many times he was just, sometimes he came home beaten up. So the law came out after a while. They wanted to expel as many Jews as they possibly can. So we were on the list because
not to kill them, but to expel them.
First to expel. So they figured anyone who is not a German citizen. They did not consider my parents German citizens because they came from Poland, because they were born in Poland. In Europe, you are where you were born. Even though I was born in Leipzig, in Germany, but my parents were Polish citizens, I was considered to be a Polish citizen. So within time, he obtained the papers, and we were fortunate as Polish citizens. Now, we had the rights, not as Jews, but as Polish citizens. And my father was smart. He said, okay, whenever he applied for his visa to go and move from Germany, he says, I'm a Polish citizen, and I request that I can take everything with me. My furniture, all my belongings, it's mine, and I'm taking it with me. I'm paying for the transportation.
With the children.
And so that's exactly what happened. And it came on a different transport, but we got everything to Poland. Whoops.
That's okay.
And the day came when we finally got on a train, and lo and behold, we came to Poland. Now, in Poland, my mother had a sister, and the sister was married to a man by the name of Szymon Weizenblum. They had a daughter, Rose, and they lived on the outskirts of Krakow. He was a beer bottler and a distributor. And that was a great place to go for me during the vacation time. Needless to say, we came to Poland. I did not speak Polish. My parents decided I need to go to school immediately. I was then 11 years old. So I need to go to school, learn Polish. My brother should go to school. My brother refused. He says, I hate the Poles. I don't like Poles. I don't like Poland. Look at the streets. They're not paved. It was just after a rain. The streets were full of mud. He says, how can they live here? Look at this. It's dirty. He says, they consider this living. They consider this a city. It's nothing but mud. And from that day on, he just refused to go back to school. He got himself a job.
What about you? You went to school.
I went to school. It was kind of strange because you hear the people talk, the teacher talk, but you don't know what's going on. And so at home...
The language was Polish.
Polish. And at home, My parents spoke fluent Polish too.
And German.
And German. So when we did arrive in Poland, they started speaking nothing but Polish. No more German. They were forcing me to speak. It was very hard.
It was good.
It was hard because Polish is an extremely hard language. So finally they decided to bring a tutor into the house. And with the tutor, I really conquered that language 101%. In fact, at one point, the following year, we had, just like you have a study, English study, you have Polish study, and the teacher was all upset because she was mad at some of the students saying, how is it possible that there's a young man, a young boy, who came only a year ago, spoke German only, didn't know Polish, and he speaks better than you do. This is an embarrassment. And I felt very lucky. So now I had two languages I could speak fluently. And it was great. It was great. I made a lot of friends. Sure, look, anti-Semitism, it's wherever you go, you will find it. But as a young kid, I said to myself, I've been through one kind of a test, and I wasn't going to let myself down with the next one. I just took it in stride, and I said to myself, look, if this is what you want to listen to, I don't know where you get the information about me or about a Jew. It's got to start somewhere. We are not being born with that kind of knowledge. Everybody's brought into this world, and they don't know nothing about religion. You don't know what you are. You don't know your name. It takes time. Now, where do you learn those things about who is a Jew and who is not a Jew, and is the Jew good or is the Jew bad? Well, it starts at home, obviously. And then, maybe later on, it starts with your peers, and maybe the house of worship somewhere down the line have something to say about it. So you learn, but eventually you as a person have to make up your own mind. Which way do you want to go? Do you want to believe all this, or you want to find out on your own? So I always bank on the latter. Find out on your own and decide on your own. Poland was a great place to live. Went to school. I had my bar mitzvah. I had a lot of people. And that's a good one because I always wanted to watch. I figured 13 years old, I'm a man now, I'm going to get a watch.
Did you have a bar mitzvah?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a bar mitzvah. And so I'm getting all the well wishes and all the little packages. I said, this must be the watch. So finally, end of the story, no watch. Pen and pencil set. And books. Evidently they wanted me to write and read more than look at the clock or look at the watch and see what time it is. I think that was not important to them. But that was fine. Hey, look, I got my watch when I was 21. So, it's just a matter of, when. It doesn't matter. During the war, I didn't need a watch. And so after the bar mitzvah, everything was great, and this was the year that was exactly, bar mitzvah was, November 27th.
Did your family attend the bar mitzvah, entire family?
Yes, and friends and everybody. Oh, yeah, it was the whole thing. You have to learn your shtick for the bar mitzvah. It's not easy. In Poland, they were very strict. Listen, when they rolled out the Torah, you had to read. So my father...
Without the vowels.
Oh, yeah. So my father, he said to himself, who to get? So we used to go to the synagogue every Friday night and Saturday morning, and there was a cantor, and he talked to him, and he says, I don't do this, but I says, I know this one guy. He says, he's perfect. He's a real Orthodox. Now he's very strict. He says, your boy needs this. And so he lived on Kazimierz. Kazimierz is the old ghetto in Krakow. It still is there. But believe it or not, the only Jews who are there are people who have restaurants or mikvahs. But the rest of them in houses, they're all Polacks. They all live there, and they love it. It's almost like it is a mitzvah to live there. Honestly, no, this is true. This is very true. And it is a very, very old part of the city. It was it was King Kazimierz who actually originated this ghetto many years back. But it was an open ghetto. It wasn't like you were locked up in it or you had to be. If you wanted to be. And so the Jews moved in there, and the Orthodox loved it there because they were one huge community. They lived in their own world. Nobody bothered them, and it was great. Yes, it was kind of a drab place. You know, you knew you were coming into Kazimierz because everything was gray. You know, the buildings were not painted, and they were peeling, and they needed some repair. But it was very quiet. You felt sort of transported back into many years back into the history where there was no cars or no bicycles. Everybody was on foot, and it was quiet. It was laid back, and I used to go there every Saturday.
Nobody was threatened at
that time? No, at that time, no. And I used to go there every Saturday, walk up to that house, up the few steps up, and he would sit there in the middle of the kitchen where there was a table. Now, I have to describe this because I put this in my book. This is so outstanding. You don't see this too often. Now, especially when later on, when the Germans come and say, in what filth we live. We live like in sewer with rats and in filth, and we stink with garlic. By the way, Knoblauch, translated in Polish into English, means garlic. Knoblauch, yeah. Czosnek is in Polish. Going back to my walks up to that place, he would sit there. It was Saturday. Well, Saturday everything stops. In the Orthodox world, nothing moves. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I walk in this kitchen. The floors were planks. They were washed the day before, scrubbed with soap, with yellow soap, no doubt, because they were just sparkling, kind of bleached. The kitchen cabinets were all closed up. Nothing on the counters, nothing. Not a utensil, nothing except newspaper. His stove was covered with newspaper. No pots, no pans, no cups, nothing visible. The kitchen table was covered with newspaper, and the siddle was there. The chairs were all washed. There was absolutely nothing except newspaper and wood. And it smelled clean. And he sat there in his silk gown with his strommel, with his side locks. He didn't even acknowledge me. The only thing he said, sit down. And we went for 2 hours. There was I could not ask any questions. He had this little wand, and he said, here, this is what we do, and do it over again and over again until I had it right. And on the day of the bar mitzvah, he looked in my eyes. He had fire in his eyes. And he said, have God may mercy on you. Do not make any mistakes. And he stood right by me. And I froze in the middle. And he immediately showed me and whispered to continue my little prayers there. Needless to say, I remember him. I can see him now. He was a wonderful human being. I've learned a lot. I have learned that silence sometimes is worth more than speaking a lot. And he was a very silent man.
But when he spoke...
When he spoke, he had something to say.
Was he an elderly man?
He was a very old man, very wise man. And, you know, many times during the war, I know what happens to people like this. You know, and I had to cry because I know the Germans, they were preying on people like this. To them, they were just cutting their hair off. They were burning their beards. They would take their prayer shawls and make them wipe the toilets with. You know, just anything to degrade them, to bring them down, to break their spirits. But you know, with all that, they couldn't break their spirits. Their spirits weren't broken. Yes, they went to the slaughterhouse, but their spirits were high. You know,
that's amazing.
In my case, I was young. And sure, they tried to break anybody's spirits. But I always said to myself one thing. I said to myself, you know, deep down, I might be Jewish. That's my religion. But I was born a German. I was born there. I was raised there. I know how your minds work. And I'm going to beat you at your mind. I'm going to be the same way. I'm going to conduct myself just as if I would be a German. And who knows? It is a possible thing that this helped me out during all this turmoil later on as it all started out. Everything went just great. And then finally, of course, you know, 1938 comes along, 1939, the beginning of 1939. Rumors are here, war's going to start. No doubt the Germans will attack us. But who's worried about it? Because England's going to come to our help. Poland's going to be safe. France is ready to attack Germany. And Germany got whipped in World War I, so they're going to get whipped again. Well, you know what the outcome was. 1939, September 1st comes along, and 6 o'clock in the morning, we roll out of bed because the planes came so low over the rooftops, bombing the station.
The Stukas.
Stukas.
Yeah.
The plan was made weeks before because my uncle had a horse and a wagon, and he says, look, if the war starts, what we're going to do, we're going to come to the city, and we're going to put the suitcases on there, and we're going to head on east to get away from the oncoming army. But Krakow is location logistically is so close to the German border that we tried to outrun them, but after about almost 2 days of just barely moving along, we were cut off. And there was only one way of doing it. We had to go back. Everybody was turned around, went back to their homes. We were lucky because we got back. Our apartment was still there. And so we just had to sweat it out and see, okay, what's going to happen next? So 2 weeks later, the war was over. Germans come out with new regulations. One thing after another. First, registration. Everybody has to register. They want to know exactly where you live, who you are. That was done. Next step, of course, was the Star of David to put on the arm. And you had to wear this. No matter where you go, you had to wear this. If you are caught without it, well, you get beat up, you get arrested, and who knows. The only concentration camp they had at that time was Dachau. And so, you know, Dachau was, before you knew it, it was overpowered. It was overloaded. So they start building new camps, of course. And Auschwitz, which was Auschwitz, became the newest camp. And this is where they started putting people in the beginning. It was not a Vernichtungslager in the beginning. It was primarily a concentration camp. In other words, they will bring you in there, you were housed, you were very poorly fed, and you were worked to death.
Were you aware that what was going on in Dachau and Auschwitz, that were killing centers or people were dying, were being gassed or anything like that?
Yes. You see, nothing can be kept a secret. There are so many forces out there. You have to remember one thing. When the Germans attacked Poland, they did not came to attack the Jews. They came to attack Poland as a country. Now, Poland, of course, had some close to 40 million people, and so what? There were 1.5, maybe 2 million people Jews. The rest of them were Polish. They were all Christians. So they were fighting them. So the Poles were their enemy. Their real enemy was the Pole. And they had to be very cautious because the Poles were not taking it lightly. They had a lot of people on the ground. They had partisans. In fact, they had two kinds of partisans. They had the National and they had the Communists. And they were fighting against the Germans, and they were everywhere. They got all the information. They wanted to know where the trains go. What's on the train? Can we blow up the train? Oh, there's people on the train. We cannot blow it up. Who are the people? Well, they find out they're Jews. They find out, what is that white stuff doing oozing out of those cars? Well, some of that stuff falls off, and they take it, and they examined it, and they found out it was a chemical. It was a chemical which supposed to sterilize the boxcar when people relieve themselves, because they own a boxcar for maybe 3 days and 4 nights, and it would be horrible to come up with a disease. So this. Yes, it was known to everyone, because even if we finally ended up in a ghetto, which we obviously did, those things came out. There were Jewish partisans as well. They were sneaking in and out, and they were bringing the news. And they were trying to warn the people, don't go. People say, how come you didn't rebel? Okay, with what? You tell me, here you have an army that fought a Polish army and won. So what have we got to fight with? We didn't even have a pitchfork. What do we fight with? Oh, we're going to buy guns? Who's going to sell us the guns? As we found out later, the poor guys in Warsaw, they created an uprising, and when they had all those weapons, they found out that ammunition wouldn't fit. It was outdated, and they didn't have enough ammunition. They had nothing to fight with. So, yes, it's easier said than done, because we now live in an entirely different world. Today, my neighbor is armed up to his head. The other neighbor is armed as well. I'm not armed. They got machine guns. If we had that, trust me, a lot of Germans would have perished.
I'm sure.
Absolutely. But you had nothing. So what do? You fight with your brain. You use your wisdom, and you string along as long as you can. In the ghetto, the conditions were horrible. Most people before the ghetto lived in an apartment, possibly in a small house. They had a lot of room for everything. And here you're being assigned. You come, you register. Oh, the Knobloch family. How many? 5 people. Okay. So you're being assigned to one room. From now on, this is where you live. All right? You sleep in there. You eat in there. And, oh, by the way, the bathroom. Well, let's see now. Those were old homes. There were apartment houses, so each floor had 2 apartments. Let's say it was 3 bedrooms on each side. So if you have 3 bedrooms, that means you have 3 families in there and 3 families in there. And if you had 5 in a family, you might have something like 30 to 40 people using one bathroom, which was in the hallway, and it had only a bathroom. Not a tub, not a shower, just a tub. Just to do your thing.
A toilet.
A toilet. 30 people? Even for 20 would have been too much. For 10 people, it's almost an overkill.
Yeah.
Today, people have 4 toilets in a house when they have only 5 people living. You have to find out a way how to get yourself clean. You have to find ways of dealing with this, because you finally see yourself, well, what is going on here? What are they trying to do? Now, because of my father's vocation, what he was doing with the fur, he was a very lucky man, because one day he saw an officer and he had a collar which was kind of yellowish. In this particular fur, he knew how to restore. The original collar on that fur is silverish, white, silverish, little like salt and pepper. Looks very elegant, very short. It looks very nice. And in Poland, in the wintertime, they like to wear this. And so he suggested, he says, I can fix this. So at first he didn't believe him, and they snap on. So he snapped it off, he took it home, brought it back 2 days later. It was like new. And the German said, this is a new collar. He says, no, that's your old collar. I just refurbished it. Well, he showed it to his comrades, and pretty soon Mr. Knoblauch was very busy. And those people who were wearing those collars were the people from the Gestapo in Krakow. So pretty soon he said, well, you've got so many collars, you've got so many coats, I need a spot, I need a room. So they gave him a room on the headquarters of the Gestapo on Pomorska Street. This was the famous street in Krakow. Everybody, the Poles knew that, because if they arrested any Polacks, they took them there for interrogation. They never came out either alive or totally half beaten to death. But they never came out free. And so his career started working for them. The Germans, no matter where they went, wherever they had a CERT commando, where they had a lot of people, headquarters of some sorts, they needed to have people work for them. They needed tailors to take care of their suits. They had to be pressed. They had to be altered. They had to be cleaned. They had to have bootmakers and shoemakers. That's a must. And the bootmakers in Poland, they made different boots than the Germans were used to. Their boots were real classy. So pretty soon, they all wanted to have new boots. So they got busy. We had tailors. We had the shoemakers. We had a jeweler. Of course, a jeweler is important. Now the Germans have all that looted and stolen gold and diamonds, and they don't know what to do with it. So they need to get some more trinkets made, redo the whole thing. So they had that jeweler man. They had electricians, because the headquarters, which they consider the headquarters, consisted of a whole city block. Now, the city block was not huge. It was about abreast, 3 apartment houses on each side. Imagine a square. With the main building, which was on a corner of Kraszinskiego, and it had a movie house in there, which they wanted because this is where they had their meetings, where they showed different movies for themselves, entertainment and such. And in the basement, they had the boiler room for central heating, for hot water and for heat in the wintertime. This is where I ended up working with a Polak down below.
Where was your family the rest of your family at this time?
Your
father was working, doing...
Well, in the beginning, he was working there and getting on a bike and coming back to the ghetto. back and forth.
So you were living in the ghetto?
We were living in the ghetto. Now, while we were living in the ghetto, I was not working at Pomorska yet. I jumped forward a little bit. We are in the ghetto. In the ghetto, everybody has to work. Everybody. You either have to go to Platzgardi, which means you have to stand there and wait until you're assigned to some German truck to go wherever, or you could get and sign up for a permanent job. In the beginning, I just went there and I said, okay, whatever they call, I'll go. Whether it was to go to the Luftwaffe, whether it was the Air Force, work there in the warehouse, or the Wehrmacht, or to the hospital. No matter where you went, it was bad.
What about your brother?
Same way. He was with me the same way. And Ilsa was the same way. She had to, report, and she would be sent wherever
wherever they were assigned.
Right. The only one who didn't go was my mom. She said, I'm going to just stay home and I'm not going to go anywhere. And they never checked really, but she just didn't go. So I used to do this. And then finally, I got sort of tired of being footballed around, and some places were so horrible to go to work. So my dad pulled some strings, and I got myself a wonderful job in the ghetto. It was envied by a lot of people. I was on a detail there was 6 of us, I think, yeah. There were 6 of us, and I was put on a...
All Jews?
Yeah. All Jews except one, a Polak. Now, he was the guy who had the horse in the wagon. And we were the sanitation department. We were the garbage detail. And this is what we did. We just brought the garbage out from the backyards, whatever garbage there was, and we loaded it on the truck, on this wagon, and he would take it out to the dump and then bring it back empty, and then we would load it up again, and so we would go back and forth. Now,
good job.
It was envied, but not while you were working on it, because whatever in the days, in the 30s, even in the early 40s, the heating system was coal and wood, and the residue was ash. Ashes fly all over the place, and when you pick up a big container with garbage loaded with ashes, it all comes on you. So we were covered. You people used to say, "Whoa, you got gray hair." It was nothing but trash.
And you inhaled some of that dust there.
And unfortunately, look, it was the old town of city, and it was infested before we came, infested with rats. And those rats, they would eat in the garbage cans. And the way it worked, 2 of us would hoist one of those containers up, and one guy on top of the wagon had to accept it and then dump it and then give it back to us. So there was always one on top. And you had to take a rope and tie your pants on the bottom, because the rats would crawl up your pant leg.
Yeah, so.
The times were very bad, and when you live on 450 calories a day, you don't have an ounce of fat on your body.
When did they feed you, and what did they feed you?
Oh, you have ration cards, and with the ration cards you go to those so-called stores.
At a certain time?
Whenever you, as long as you had a piece of a stick of cart there left, they would tear it off and say, okay, you wanted what? A quarter pound of butter? That'll last you for a whole month? You maybe a half a pound of sugar, or what's that? 1 loaf of bread for about 4 days. Now, we have the Germans, who are educated people, who are figuring all this out and saying, we have to break the spirits of every Jew. We're not going to feed them. We're going to make them work and let them fall to the wayside. That's fine. This is exactly what we want. if they die of natural causes, it's so much easier for us because we don't have to spend money for bullets. And we don't have to kill them. So this is good. If they die on their own accord, so this is wonderful. This is the best remedy they can come up with. It was bad. It was very bad. I remember
starvation, just so painful.
Yeah, and you tried to make the best of what you had. And one of the boys, one of the men on our group, we didn't know. He spoke German and he spoke Polish, but mostly German, but he spoke with an Austrian accent because I could recognize that. And one day, everybody was so down for some reason or another, and he was standing there on top of that, on a heap of the garbage. He lost so much weight. He had a jacket on, this old suit jacket, which was just hanging on him. It was like totally oversized, and he looked so meager. His cheekbones were sticking out, and his eyes were so deep. And he had an old hat which was kind of shredded, on the outside. And once of a sudden, he brings his arms out and he starts singing. And he sang an aria, I don't know, from some kind of an opera. It was so beautiful that, I almost have to cry now because everybody stopped. And people started, some passerbys, they came by and I was looking at them and they were just standing there. And it was
shocking.
It was. It turns out
shocking and beautiful.
Yeah, and he was an understudy in the Vienna Opera House. A talent. How many times have I seen a German come up who was a nothing, uneducated almost, you could tell, and nothing. And here you have this talent, and it's being wasted. Where's the justice here? You ask yourself, you said, there was a good thing, it was a bad thing. It was a wonderful thing, but bad at the same time because you say, how is that possible? How can anyone allow this to happen? It is so against human nature.
It's inhuman.
A lot of people always said, the Poles, they make so many jokes about Poles. I'll tell you a Polish joke, and it's degrading. It's almost as degrading as I've got an Irish joke, a Jewish joke. They're all degrading. The guy who was the man, the Polak, who was taking that garbage out and bringing back, he was a farmer's son, uneducated, and I'm sure he didn't know how to read. But he had a heart. He had a heart because he saw that I tried and the rest of them tried. But with me, I was the youngest in the group, and I tried so hard to work the right way and get things done. And he realized that. And he also was one of the first who helped save my life. He was bringing in a loaf of bread, smuggled under his wagon, tied down in a brown bag, hidden completely from sight, especially for me.
Wow. How could you eat it without showing others?
Well, you had to wait until a certain time. In other words, he would say...
You were alone, huh?
He would say, when I go out and dump, he says, you move away from the group and go somewhere. When you see me coming, I'm going to go into a side street there or stop for a moment, give you the bread, you run. Look, the ghetto was so small. Everything was in a proximity. You could run and you were home. It's like I said in the book. It wasn't supposed to be funny, but I thanked him for my daily bread, which was true. I
wondered if some of your other people that were in that work group were aware. They could have been so jealous of you.
They could have.
They had nothing.
Trust me, and that used to happen among people.
People would fight over a piece of bread.
Well, some Jews who were hiding out in outside the ghetto, they were sometimes fingered by the population for a loaf of bread.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, we used to say it. That was a fact. And this was the beginning when he saved my life. I have to bring this out because this
important. Yeah.
Here's another important part which also concerned Yashik. That was his name, first name. And the old gray mare, because the horse was gray.
Age?
No, he was older. He was much older. We were finishing up our street, a street, and the action came in process. They blocked everything off, and he comes up to me and he says, the wagon will be full in about 10 minutes. He says, if you stay, they no doubt will take you, because you'll be just standing here on the street. So he says, I tell you what, I'm going to sit on the side. They look at me, they know that I'm not a Jew. I'm a Slav, like I look like a... And he says, you get on top of that wagon and you take it out. And by golly, I knew where the dump was because I went with him many times holding the tarp down. And I went, and he says, stay as long as you can. Don't come up too soon. And I went and I stayed there until it's almost starting to get dark. I came back, and there he was sitting. And he was happy to see me. And he told me...
With a horse drawn?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he told me, he says, they're all gone. Even that guy who was singing. So his voice was silenced for good.
They took everyone away.
They took everybody away. They were right there on the same street. So again, there's you have this one person who is a simple, very simple human being, and he saves a life. You don't have to be educated. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to be rich.
You have to have a heart.
Just have a heart. Just have a little bit of good sense to save somebody's life. But then, this had to cease too, because one time my father came home. Instead of a fur coat, he had a leather coat. Some German, well, he was not a full German. He was a Volksdeutsche. What is a Volksdeutsche? A Volksdeutsche is a German who comes from a German family, rather, and lived in Poland. Many years ago, they used to come from, they were being invited by the Polish government because those Germans were better farmers than the Poles, and they were teaching them. We're talking about hundreds of years before. And they kind of stayed there. But they never lost their German thing, so to speak. They wanted to be Germans, but they were living in Poland. So those were the sympathizers in helping the Germans win the war. So to be rewarded for it, Mr. Zonderman got himself a big farm. And he had a motorcycle with a sidecar. And being that you ride a motorcycle, you have to wear a long, full-size leather jacket. Coat. And the coat was kind of like leather. When it's old, it gets a little brittle, it cracks here and there. And he wanted my father to rejuvenate the coat. And he told me, he says, I don't work with leather. He said, well, are you going to come up with some kind of an idea? So my father figured, look, I got to do the best I can. So he comes home, he drops the coat, and he says, I've got a job for you. He says, from now on, you're going to fix this code. I said, how?
He said that to you?
My dad said that to me. And he says, well, here, I got a box, and in that box you find cans of brown shoe polish. You put the shoe polish on that coat from morning till night. And then the next day, you're going to polish it, and you do it over again. Well, I've done it, I don't know, until I run out of the shoe polish. And I must admit that the shoe polish worked to a certain extent. It brought the shine back like crazy. You know, some of the small little cracks, they kind of disappeared, or maybe the shoe polish got into them.
Maybe it lubricated it a little.
But needless to say, he was very, very impressed. And he said, thank you so much, you know. And my dad said, well, don't thank me, thank my son. He said, what do you mean? He says, oh, he did it. Well, you have a son. He said, how old is he? He said, oh, he's 15 years old. He says, oh, 15 years old. He says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, you tell him to be packed, because tomorrow morning I'll pick him up, and he's going to be with me on the farm. I'm going to take him to the farm. He's going to work on the farm, and I'm going to fatten him up. And sure enough, the following morning, he comes with his sidecar right in front, into the ghetto, right in front of the house, and he picks us up. He takes me to his farm. Now, I have to mention one thing more. When we were assigned in the ghetto to our apartment, the whole house, that whole apartment house, was reserved for all the families who worked for the Gestapo. If I want to go back to that, they had house painters there as well, because they had to paint the interrogation rooms after they got bloody every day. So every day they had to put a new coat of paint on it. And they had regular people working to clean apartments, because they used to live in those places as well. So we had a total of 120 Jews who worked for the Gestapo itself. But then they had families with them. So this is why we lived in this particular house. And that particular house, quote, was off limits, at least in the beginning, from any action, because they needed us. So farmland was very nice. When I got to the farm, it was obviously on the outskirts of town. He had one of those little working farms. He had 5 cows and 2 young little, what I